Hello, everyone. Hi, this is Erica from Black Women Thriving, and this is our regularly scheduled LinkedIn Lives. Apologies. Time is a construct, number one, but two, it's moving really quickly. So I'm gonna say I'm not sure if we did one last month, but we are back on schedule in terms of doing these LinkedIn Live for folks and wanting to show up and share with our community about ways that folks and their organizations, companies, departments can move closer to creating a thriving culture, even in the midst of uh, the storm that is around us. So today I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about, and we want to make these short and impactful. But and today's topic, we're going to talk about trust. We're going to talk about trust in the context of resilience, and what I mean when I speak about resilience, I'm talking about organizational resilience. So uh, this this is let's just name where we are. I think I did reference it. We're in a moment right now. I just did a webinar last week talking about how we can um, try to incorporate more thriving behaviors even in the midst of chaos and uncertainty. But we're in this moment right now where, with all that is happening and it's affecting our personal lives and professional lives, as I wrote last week, I think we're being called upon to be resilient. Um, and we may be feeling that calling sort of internally, like, how can I be resilient? But we may also have bosses. We may be bosses. We might have managers and leaders um, who are saying, what's really important right now is that you are resilient. And how can our workers, our staff, our teams be resilient during this time? And um, you know, as I said last week in the post that I put up, like, I I have a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction to the word resilient. I think it's overused. I also think that it is over tapped, if you will. I think that one of the things, and I think this particularly around for Black women, in my own experience, but then also in the research for Black Women Thriving, this idea of resilience is, it's been demanded of us our entire lives. Like, historically, and again, so I'm going to center Black women, and as I do this, I want you to think about this the whether or not you are a Black woman or not, whether or not you have also experienced this pressure. But I'll say historically, particularly for Black women and Black folks, our resiliency has been something that's been demanded of us for our entire lives. And I don't particularly think that that's up for debate. um, from birth to our jobs, we have had to figure out, we've attended webinars or had conversations about how do we navigate society. There are norms that we have been, that I, as a Black woman, have had told to me of, like, this is how go along to get along. So there's this resiliency that has been built into me being a Black person that, I have always had to rely on. And I think so when I sit inside of an organization, or if I am in an organization, and I have had to constantly sort of tap into my own personal resiliency in order to be on a team or work in an organization or work in a department or a company. um, it's a it's a it's a label that causes me to continue to have to expend even more energy that maybe I don't have. And we're going to get into that a little bit. What it means at work And when somebody says that a person is resilient at work, is that it's a flattering label. You're resilient. But the message that it sends is keep going in this environment, keep dealing with the way that our organization or department may not be supportive of you, or may not be an organization that is resilient, or a place where folks feel like they can thrive. Keep going in spite of that. Um, and it goes without saying that I don't actually think that that's the way that organizations should be operating. And I think it is a lapse of responsibility when they continue to ask people to do that. So let's consider resiliency with a different lens and think of it as like, how are we building resilient organizations? And so, I give you that as sort of an overview to then say, like, let's zero in on one aspect of building a resilient organization, and that's trust. So, and how do we not only have trust as a skill and a practice, but also how do we measure trust? Um, because I think that if we asked anecdotally today, and we don't even have to ask anecdotally because I'm about to give you some data, whether or not from the employee side, if employees said that they, trust, if they had trust in their organizations, some of the numbers would startle you. There are some positives, and numbers, but there's also a whole bunch of negative numbers around employees and trust in their organization. So I want to share a few statistics with you just to give you some background knowledge in this area. So a PricewaterhouseCoopers study, which I will go back after and put in like the specific link to this, said that you know they asked folks, they asked executives, and then they asked their employees, like, do they think that their employees trust them? Well, 80% of the executives who answered this said, yes, but I believe in my employees trust me. But then when that same question was asked to the employees, only 67% of them said that they actually trusted their managers. Um, we have from Black Women Thriving, the study that we did in 2020 or released in 2022, we asked questions specifically about trust. Um, and we didn't ask, we did ask sort of specific questions. We did ask, like, do you trust your colleagues? And we did have data about that. But we also asked questions sort of like around the area of um, what is the impact of not feeling as though you work in a place where you feel like you can trust folks. And so one of those statistics that came up, or I want to share three, is, you know, when we were talking specifically about burnout, we had a piece of data that came out is that 59% of Black women say that negative work environments contribute to burnout. And then when we sort of dug a little deeper and started to think about, what did it mean? What were some of the aspects of a negative environment? What our drill down showed is that a lot of the participants who took the survey felt like that they did not feel as though they had trust both in their colleagues to do what was just, and they didn't necessarily felt like they had good relationships with their managers. So we dig deeper into that 59%, we can see, like, here is an example of where trust is not high. Another statistic that I want to share with you and then connect it to trust that came out of our study was that 72% of Black women said that they code switch regularly. Um, and if you're unfamiliar with code switching, you should look that up. But I want to talk about this idea of code switching and why we feel as though we have to do that. And part of that is because we feel as though, I'm a Black woman, I feel as though if I don't appear and sound and show up in a certain way, I don't trust that I will be taken seriously. Okay. So, there is another way, that is another example of where trust, if you just ask the question, directly, do you feel as though you can trust people? You will get one piece of data. But then when you dig deeper into like, what are all the ways that we have to have trust in order to have a resilient or a healthy team or organization? You're going to get another layer of data that could be helpful. Um, and so, as we think about just the numbers that I've given you, and again, there are more numbers, but I'm not doing an hour-long webinar here. What they tell a story, which is that, like, all too often, I think we've thought about trust as being like this soft issue, where it's like, oh, but it really is. The impact of trust is that it drains energy. It affects individually. It drains energy. I think among teams, um, it hurts teamwork. It hurts, team building. I think amongst, sort of like departments and trust, like how do you, it impacts productivity. So this, the idea of thinking about trust not as a soft skill, but as part of the tool or part of the like foundation for how we have resilient organizations and teams, I think is something that's really important. And I don't think that we can have true resilience without trust. Okay. I don't think that we can have true resilience in organizations without trust. And I think that that's particularly important for me to say at times right now, because, like I said, I think sort of in this like layer of what's happening in the world that's impacting our work, um, our work environments are being impacted. So, um, one of the ways that I think we need to start thinking about trust and figuring out whether or not we have trust in our teams and in our organizations is to ask questions. And so when we were, um, like I said, when we found out information about trust in our Black Women Thriving data, and we saw that it was as big of a deal as it was. What it really highlighted to me was this idea that um, not only was trust important for resiliency, it was also important for folks to thrive. And as we began to dig deeper and think, well, how can we promote trust? Um, I went back to the question, which is that I know, how are people going to find out whether or not trust exists in their organizations? And how can we build trust more intentionally? And so when we were creating tools that appear on the Black Women Thriving platform, um, we built a tool that we call the Trust Questions Bank. And so, um, inside of that, which you can find on the Black Women Thriving platform, if you become a member of the Thrive Hive, which is free, if you become a member of Thrive Hive, you'll have access to that trust question bank. And what we did is we put together um, over 25 questions that we thought that organizations and leaders could use to help them figure out how folks were feeling about trust in their organization, whether or not, and we spread it out into like different themes. So when we thought about trust, we thought about fairness, we thought about integrity, we thought about transparency, and we thought about feedback. Like those are some of the ways that sort of trust manifests itself inside of organizations. And so we came up with these questions that we thought, could be used either in engagement surveys or in feedback sessions or in one-on-ones. And we wanted to make those available to folks. And so our goal was to offer these as tools not just for reflection, but for points of like action. So let me give you a few examples. One, like three of the questions that we asked, and I wrote them down, was around transparently. Like we said, if we suggested like you put this into an engagement survey, we said, do you believe leaders make decisions transparently? And then like the second part of that question was even in challenging times. Asking that question, first of all, that's like a yes or no question. And you get that data. But that second part of the question is like, even in challenging times, shows whether or not, like, if you get the data from that, analyzing that data would show, okay, do we have a practice of for our managers to like practice transparency? Okay, maybe the answer is yes. But when things get tough, what do we do? Do we revert back to being like, okay, things need to be very secretive and contained, or do we maintain that transparency? That is going to show us, um, or show a manager like you probably need to like really think about how you were integrating this into how you manage on a day-to-day basis, so that it does become natural to you to have that skill in terms of practicing transparency. Another question is, do you feel comfortable offering feedback to your manager without fear of negative consequences? That's a little wordy. We can make it like a little bit shorter, but the point of that is, you know, um, that would relate to feedback. Like, do folks feel as though they can speak up? And do they feel like they will speak up and continue to be treated fairly? Or do they think that they may receive negative consequences? Receiving that information, I think, is very important. First of all, there's like a whole set of like literature and practices around how do we give feedback, particularly, and I will say this, particularly to folks who are underrepresented. Yes, I'm using one of the words that is banned. Um, uh, but again, so this becomes a way of being able to see, um, where it is that we as managers and leaders need to tweak our behaviors. Questions like those can help us see where our employees feel like trust is strong, and where it's weak, where it's broken. And beyond having putting together this trust bank because we thought it could be a tool and helpful for folks to utilize, we also knew that it would be important as a form of measurement because we all know that in terms of decision making, we rely on data. We rely on data to inform our decisions, and um, our one of our goals was to make sure that trust was something that was being measured and is being measured inside of organizations. So, I gave you some ideas of how you can use this tool. You can, in the tools, again, is on our website. If you become a member of Thrive Hive, you'll have access to the tools. Like I said, there's 30 questions broken out. But let me give you some uses for these questions. One, you could use them as a part of a pulse survey. You could use them in your one-on-ones, your feedback sessions. Um, you could use them as a part of your employee engagement survey, or incorporating those into, if you're using, you know, if you're big enough to have a firm who is doing that for you, see if they have questions on trust, and really begin to look at them maybe as a point of comparison against ours. You can use that information as a part of, how are you continuing to improve your managers and leader skills? Um, you know, and what I would leave you with in terms of thinking about trust is, we are at a time where trust is being eroded, and actually, I think that trust has been being eroded probably since we've begun when we started having mass layoffs in certain sectors close to 2 years ago. I think trust has been eroding since, there's been a theme in my discussions here, that I've had here on TikTok, which is like, I think in this new world of work, we are having to negotiate what are the norms that we're willing to have. And I feel like trust to a certain degree is has maybe slipped off. And I don't think for resilience of organizations and teams that we can afford for trust to slip off. And I think we need to recommit to it, as a way to, um, really strengthen our teams. And if we're leaders and managers, we need to recommit to finding out where the trust lies, figuring out how we can, model more trust, considered to be trustworthy, etc. So, I hope that this was helpful to you. Um, we'll be back next month on a different topic, as it relates to, you know, thriving, skills, tools that we have that are available to you, and really trying to make sure that we, continue to, provide folks here on LinkedIn with our monthly LinkedIn lives, some insights that we have, and share what we know. So thank you. Take care.